who was a runner. And Kayla Montgomery had something very unique happen to her in the freshman year in high school. She was diagnosed with MS. As you may know, that is a brain illness where the immune system sort of attacks the brain at times. So sometimes she would have trouble with different muscles in her body, and a lot of times with her legs. You see, after running about 5 miles or so, her legs would become numb. And at the end of every race, her coach would be there at the finish line to catch her when she fell. She wanted to run in college so bad, and in fact, in high school, she had several different colleges who wanted to have her for a scholarship. But many of them, they backed away when they found out that she had MS. Except for one. Lipscomb University in Nashville, Tennessee offered this young lady a scholarship, and she accepted. Now, as far as I know, she's still running today, but it's interesting what one of her fellow runners said about her. Here's what she said. She could wake up one morning and not be able to run ever again. So she really gives it her all every single time she runs. She gives herself the best of everything. You know, that reminds me of what Jesus said in John chapter 9 and verse 4 when He said, I must work the works of Him that sent me while it is day, because the night comes when no man can work. Just like this runner said, I'm going to give it everything I've got while I'm here. Jesus said, my number one goal in life is just to serve God. I want to talk to you about a story that Jesus told tonight, which we call the parable of the talents. The moral of the story is we just give it our best shot and God will take care of everything else. We say, Lord, I want to be your servant for the rest of my life, and everything will fall into place. It's amazing. There were two men who really did that. But before we go there tonight, I want us to go to Mark chapter 14. I want to give you several passages before we begin. Some of these you could just write in your margin, but you'll notice this in Mark chapter 14. There is a young lady who really did something special for Jesus. Jesus said, let her alone. You see, the disciples were upset about this lady. And He said, why do you trouble her? For she hath wrought a good work on me. For you have the poor with you always, and whensoever you will, that ye may do good to them. But me you have not always. She hath done what she could, and she has come aforehand to anoint my body for the burying. And wheresoever this gospel shall be preached throughout the whole world, and this also that she hath done shall be spoken of as a memorial of her. You know, this lady did something that no other disciple in the room was willing to do. She sacrificed more than a month of her income to break that ointment over her Lord's head. And the smell of that ointment filled the whole room. And all the disciples looked back in literal disgust at what she had done. And one of them even spoke up, and I have an idea, it was probably Judas Iscariot. He said, that ointment could have been sold and given to the poor because it's worth so much money. Jesus said, you know what? You condemn her, but she has done something that she could do. Maybe she can't go out and reach 100 souls with the gospel. Maybe she can't go out and sacrifice a lot of time and effort and all these different things, but there is something that she could do, and she took advantage of it, and He said, we need to accept what she could do. You know, I'm reminded of this passage in Luke 17 and verse 10. It says, so likewise ye, when you have done all those things which you are commanded to do, you say that we are unprofitable servants, for I have done that which was my duty to do. Not a Christian in this room deserves a pat on the back for doing what they are supposed to do. We talk about the parable of the talents. There were two men who did exactly what the Lord wanted them to do, and the Lord wasn't going to, pet them or cater to them because that's what they were supposed to do, and they would get a reward for it when they died. Same is true for us. Nobody deserves a pat on the back for just simply doing what God asked us to do. I want to begin a lesson tonight that is the finish of a 3-sermon series about the work of the Lord. I want to challenge us this week. How many of us can honestly say that we serve God every day? Let's challenge ourselves. You know, as God's people, we say, all right, I want to be a worker for the Lord. You know, we sing that song, I will work, I will pray, I will labor every day in the vineyard of the Lord. We just sang a song that said, have thine own way, Lord, have thine own way. Thou art the potter and I am the clay. Mold me and make me after thy will. Well, what does that mean? That means that we say, Lord, I just want to serve you. Any capacity you can use me, that I can be used, let's just do that. And Jesus will also say about us that we too have done what we could do. You know, Paul wrote to the Colossian brethren, I want to give you this one more before we begin. He said, whatever you do, do it heartily, not as unto men, but as unto the Lord, knowing that of the Lord you will receive the reward for your inheritance. Notice, for you serve the Lord Christ. That's what it's all about. Everything else will fall into place when that happens. My family will be what it should be when I serve God. My life will be what it should be when I serve God. You know, my children will turn out the way they're supposed to when we serve God. You know, all things in life take care of themselves when this is the number one goal. I think we learn this principle from this parable that Jesus taught. Let's go to Matthew 25 and begin our lesson tonight, talking about the parable of the talents. Okay? What does God want us to do? This is a 3-part sermon series, and this is the 3rd part. What does God expect from me? That's the question that we've asked in all 3 of these lessons. What does God want me to do? I think we're going to finish and see tonight. There are several things. Number 1, God expects me not to live in sin. That's a theme of the New Testament. A man cannot live in sin and serve God acceptably. Number 2, God expects me to be faithful to Him. Number 3, God expects me to do kingdom work. These are 3 themes that I have found throughout the New Testament that you cannot get around. A man cannot bypass any one of those. Too many times in the church, I feel like members think, number 1, that they have to be perfect to be Christians. That's not possible. It's not going to happen. I feel like that church members think they'll never be good enough to go to heaven. You see, God is not expecting you to get to heaven on your own goodness. He's expecting you to get to heaven covered by the grace of God and the blood of Jesus Christ, being faithful to Him, being a servant in His kingdom. So I'm either faithful, covered by God's grace, a servant in His kingdom, or I'm not faithful to God, not covered in His grace, and not a servant in His kingdom. So tonight, I think that's sort of the lesson that we're learning. Which man are we in the story? I coach my children's soccer team pretty regular, and this year I'm coaching Josiah's team, and my wife is coaching the 2 younger girls' soccer teams. And the other night, you know, we had a boy on our team. He's a good player. You know, he's not the best player that we have, but he's a good player. And I always put him at forward every single game. And this young man, I told him the last game, I said, you need to run. Do not walk. If you're on the soccer field, you do not walk. I know he's got so much potential. You know, even in his culture, you know, they call it football, but they play soccer in their culture. He is good. So this past game, I put him at defender, which is in the back of the field, where you don't do much running. And I told him, if I see you hustling, I will put you back at forward. So I noticed he had a little more pep in his step this time, you know. Now, I wasn't trying to punish him, but I was trying to teach him a lesson. You know, you have to earn a spot. If you want it bad enough and you want to score a goal, then you cannot walk around on the soccer field. I think there's a little bit of similarity there in what we're reading tonight in Matthew chapter 25. no less than 100%. You know, I heard one guy, he said, go big or go home. I also think that's a theme in the Bible. 3 things I want to notice tonight: accountability, acknowledgeability, and also the achievability. Let's look at these in Matthew chapter 25, beginning in verse 14. Jesus is teaching. He said, the kingdom of heaven is likened to a man who traveled into a far country, who called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods. And to one he gave 5 talents, and to another he gave 2, and to another 1, and to every man according to his, notice, several ability. Now that young man I just talked to you about, he had plenty capability of being a good forward and scoring a goal. But I knew if he was going to walk, he wasn't going to score. Similar principle. Then he that received 5 talents, he went and traded with the same, and he made other 5 talents. And likewise he that had 2, he did the same thing. He gained other 2. But he that received 1, he went and digged in the earth, and he hid the Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants cometh, and he reckoneth with them. Which leads me to my first point: accountability. Every single person in this room, including the one you're looking at right now, will be accountable on the day of judgment for the kingdom work that we have done, or the kingdom work that we have not done. I'll be honest with you tonight, and I don't want to shove the Bible down your throat, but I'm telling you this: I am so scared for people in the church who just come to church. I'll be honest with you, I just can't picture myself doing that. You know, I can't picture myself just coming in the worship service, sitting on a pew, and leaving and forgetting about working for the kingdom of God until I come back again and sit in the pew. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know how week after week after week that happens in someone's life and they can look themselves in the mirror. I couldn't do it. So I hope tonight I can be straightforward with you. God is going to reckon with me too. And I would be much better off if I looked myself in the mirror and said, you know what, I'm just going to try it. I'm just going to try it. What's the worst that can happen? You know? If I say, all right, well, you know what, next quarter I think I'll try teaching that Bible class. Or, you know, maybe I don't even want to go that far. Maybe I'll just ask someone else if I could just sit in and maybe learn how to do that. Maybe I could create a visitation program that doesn't exist. Maybe I could eventually train myself to think, you know, maybe I could be a deacon over evangelism in the church one day. You see, it's all about goal setting. And there were 2 men who set goals, and they were faithful stewards with what the Lord had given them. And there was one man, he didn't set anything. But they were all accountable, even the ones that did good. I want to give you several scriptures here. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 3. 1 Corinthians chapter 3. There was one woman, and she was arguing with her husband. You know, her husband said that men can do much better work than women. He said men can even work harder than women. She looked at him with a smile and she said, let me tell you this. The reason why men work harder than women is because women usually get it right the first time. There may be some truth to that. You know, I know there's a lot of areas in my wife's life that she is so much smarter than I am. You know, I'm not a smart person, but I want to tell you, she went through high school and she did very well, usually not having to study. And I'm the person, you know, who studies hard and makes a C. That's just how I am. You know, you think about the work of a Christian. It's just work. Whether you do it in a smart way and you're really efficient with what you do, or whether it takes you a long time to finish what God wants you to do, friend, it's just work. The work of the Christian is working. And I think that's what we see in this lesson. Look here, 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 6. When Paul wrote to the Corinthian brethren and he said, I have planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. But I want to tell you tonight, just as sure as I'm standing before you, God cannot increase something that hasn't been planted. That's just the nature of the way God has set this up. If I'm not willing to go and ask somebody for a Bible study, the Bible study's not going to happen. And I'll tell you this, I'll even go further. I ask people for Bible studies and it won't happen. I'm working on a guy right now. I've even gone out to his house and tried to help this man, and I cannot get him to study the Bible with me. Well, that doesn't excuse the fact that I say, well, I know he's not going to study with me, so I'm going to give up. No, I'm not going to give up on this guy. I am going to keep on. I don't care if it takes me a year to get a Bible study with this guy. I'm going to find out a way. Accountability. He said, neither is he that plants anything, neither is he that waters, but this is about God, what God can do in someone's life. And God can't do anything if I don't reach out. Here's the key, though. He that plants and he that waters are one, and every man shall receive his own reward according to his own labor. You see, that makes it serious. Not only for the guy who needs to be taught, but it makes it serious for me as the man who needs to do the teaching. I'll give you some others in rapid fire fashion. I mean, let's just think about this. Jesus taught the parable of the sowers, and he said, there was a man, he went forth to sow some seed. Some fell by the wayside, some fell among the rocky ground, some among the thorns, and then there were some in good soil. And notice what happened in that good soil. It brought forth fruit. And I want to tell you, this lesson here, in my opinion, has been overlooked for a long time. This lesson is all about evangelism. The New Testament is all about evangelism. You see, because that seed fell in good soil, and guess what it did? It reproduced. Just like everything in the plant world outside there. You see that pine tree out there, that little pine cone will burst little seeds, and it will produce more pine trees and 1 million of frustrating pine needles, right? That's this story. It's filled with kingdom work. The New Testament is filled with kingdom work. And some people, they have the ability to produce 100-fold. Some people have the ability to produce 60-fold and some 30-fold. But I'll tell you this. Some people have the ability to produce 0-fold. I would be scared to death tonight to die and go to heaven or die and reach the pearly gates and tell God that I did not produce one single seed of fruit from my Christian life. There was a surgeon and a mechanic, and they were talking. And the mechanic, he looked at the heart surgeon. He said, your job and my job are a lot alike. The surgeon looked at him and thought, what in the world is he talking about? Took me 15 years to learn how to do what I do. But anyway, the mechanic kept talking. He said, we do the same job. The mechanic said, I work on a system to check and see how it's running, and I open it and fix the valves and things like that. He said, you do the same thing, don't you? And the heart surgeon just sort of scratched his head a little bit. He said, I see what you're saying. He said, but I want to present this to you. Next time you work on a car, why don't you try doing it while it's still running? You see, he got the point then. You see, because one man has totally devoted his life to something that is far more difficult. I'm not downplaying the role of a mechanic. I love mechanics, and I would be the mechanic. I'm not smart enough to be a heart surgeon, and nor would I cannot even go to school that long. But I will tell you this. That doctor has devoted himself to saving people's lives, not cars. Do we need cars? Yes. But we need people to live too. The word serve is found 209 times in the New Testament. In the Bible. The word servant is found 502 times. Service 132 times. Minister 100 times. You see, you could add all those up, and what is that? Maybe 900 times the idea of service is mentioned in the Bible. God's people in the Old and New Testament will be accountable for how they served. I'll give you two more, and then I'm going to move on. In Matthew 16:27, he said, the Son of Man shall come in a glory with all his angels with him, and he shall give according to every man's work. Every man's work. That's accountability. God said to Ezekiel way back in the prophet's times that when I speak to a man, he said, and he said, when I speak to the wicked and say, thou shalt surely die, but thou speakest not to warn the wicked man of his wicked way. That same wicked man, he will die in his sin. But notice what he said to Ezekiel. But his blood will be all over your hands. I will require it at thine hand. Just simply because he would bury what God had given him. So I hope the third lesson of this series is something that sort of teaches me the seriousness of what's going on here. You know, I understand it's not easy to teach people. I understand that not everybody is ready to do that. But I think that all Christians have missed something in our generation. We haven't been taught properly to go out and reach people with the gospel. And I hope today that we'll see the seriousness of that. That we'll not just set it aside and say, well, you know, that's what we hired the preacher to do, or that's where the elders are responsible, or the deacons. You know, that's not my responsibility. Friend, it's all Christians' responsibilities. Otherwise, the blood of people will be on our hands. He said, if thou warn the wicked, and he turn not from his wickedness, nor from his wicked way, he shall die in his iniquity. But notice, but thou hast delivered thy soul. So if I don't warn him, I haven't delivered my soul. But if I do warn, and I've done all that I can to try to serve God effectively, he said, then I have delivered my soul on the day of judgment. Number 2. In this parable where we find a man with 5 talents who gained 5 more as a good steward. We find a man who had 2 talents, he gained 2 more as a good steward. We find one who did not do anything. He was a bad steward. Number 1, I see accountability in that. Number 2, I see acknowledgeability. All right, I want to go back to Matthew chapter 25 very quickly. I'm only going to spend a short time on this point. I have 2 passages I want you to notice, and most of my time is spent on point number 1. But let's go back to Matthew 25 just for a moment. I want to pick out a word here. Okay? In Matthew 25 and verse 14, when he said, the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling into a far country, and he delivered unto him his servants his goods. Now notice what he said after he describes the 5 talents, the 2 talents, and the 1. He said, to every man according to his several ability. The reason why God gave the 5-talent man 5 talents is because he had the ability to increase 5 talents. Now, think about this. We use the word talent today to mean some kind of ability that we have, right? But in this story, it's actually a measurement of weight. And a talent of gold is a lot of gold. I mean, you can do some research. There are different variations of views on this, so you could find different meanings of it. But I will tell you this, it's a lot of money. Some people say upwards of $10,000 or more. So let's just sort of apply this then. A man who was wealthy, he gave this guy $50,000. And he said, when I come back, I expect you to have 100. This man, he gave him $20,000. And then this man, he gave him 10. So they all had enough to do whatever it is they needed to do with it. That 1-talent man, he had the ability to double his just like the others. But he didn't do it. There were American soldiers in Germany who decided they were going to restore a cathedral that had been damaged in the war. So during the process, they thought, you know what, we need to fix this statue that was in front of the cathedral. So they stood it up and they noticed this statue doesn't have any hands. So they tried to figure out, what are we going to do? You know, I guess we got to make new hands to put on the statue. One of the soldiers had a good idea. They put a plaque at the bottom of the statue and it reads, he has no hands but our hands. Friend, I'll tell you today, that principle is still true. God is not going to use another method to spread the gospel. He's going to use us. That's the way He's designed it in the New Testament. So what ability do we have then? 1 Peter 4:11, the Bible says, if any man speak, let him speak as the oracles of God. If any man minister, let him do it to the ability which God giveth, that God in all things might be glorified, right? God says, all right, I don't care how you do it, just do it. Because I can't receive glory in the church without anybody doing it. As long as we try, we give it our best. God, He does the rest. You can write this one in your margin. Acts chapter 11 and verse 29 30, it says, the disciples, every man according to his ability, they determined to send relief to the brethren which dwelt in Judea, which also they did. And they sent it to the elders by the hands of Barnabas and Saul. You see, they did it according to the ability that they had. That's all God expected. So tonight, I see accountability, I see acknowledgeability, and I like this. The achievability. You think about how those two men felt when the Lord came back and He reckoned with His servants and they set that down at His feet. Think about that. You think about the pearly gates of heaven when we finally get there. And I can imagine not a one of us is going to feel like we should go in. But to see my Lord's face and know I gave it my best shot. Think about how that's going to feel. And He says to us, just like He said to those two, well done, good and faithful servant, for thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. See, these men were treated well because they achieved whatever it is that God expected from them. There was a plane crash in Taipei, Taiwan. This man in the life vest here is a survivor. He was 72 years old. He said something about this plane crash, and I'll share with you some of the article that's mentioned here, and then I want to make a point. It says, from the start of the flight in Taiwan's capital, survivor Huang Jin-sung, he suspected trouble. So he was on the plane, and immediately he knew something was wrong. He said, there was some kind of sound next to me, and I did not feel right shortly after takeoff, and the engine did not feel right. So there were 15 survivors of a total of 58 people in the crash. It said 32 people died and 11 people were missing at the time that this picture was taken. Here's another picture, if I can get it to work right, of the actual crash happening. Now I think to myself, if I were driving down the road and you can see the airplane's wing has hit that bridge right there, my stomach would be in a knot. If I was driving down the road and I knew all those people just crashed. What if the people on this bridge just kept on going? Well, I know they're crashing. But hey, I'm still alive. I'm just thankful you let me get through this, I'm just going to keep going about my merry way. How many times have I done that in real life? I know that my neighbor is lost. I know there's a coworker that works with me that trusts me. And I know they would probably come to church if I asked them, but I never have. I know there's a cousin of mine or a family member of mine that I'm pretty close with. Maybe we even talk about spiritual things from time to time, but yet I've never asked them to study the Bible with me. Friend, I want to tell you tonight, that would be just like watching that plane come down and me not doing anything about it. But what if? What if? We drove upon the crash scene and there was a man who was about to die and he's bleeding to death, and we get in there and we put pressure on the wound and everything is crazy. It's like a big blur to us 2 days later, but then we find out that that guy in the hospital who was in ICU, he gets moved to a regular room. And we go to that hospital, we sit right in front of him, we look him in the eye, and he cries and cries and said, "Thank you for saving my life." How do you think that would feel, brethren? When your neighbor goes to heaven and he looks you in the face with tears in his eyes and he said, "Thank you for teaching me the truth." Friend, that's what it's all about. The achievability, right? God said He just wants us to achieve it. Matthew chapter 25 and verse 21, the same chapter that we're in tonight. He said, His Lord said to him, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord." In verses 8 and 10, the foolish man said to the wise, the foolish virgin said to the wise, "Give us of your oil, for our lamps are gone out." And they said, "No, not so. There's not enough for you and us. But go you rather and sell and buy for yourselves." And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and they that were ready went in with him into the marriage. You see, the achievability was all about preparation. The reason why the 5-talent guy was a good steward is because he prepared to be that. The 2-talent guy, he prepared to be that. And the 1 talent, he didn't prepare anything. In fact, he didn't want to do anything. I want to close with this passage. 2 Timothy chapter 4. There was a Bible class teacher who asked her first graders, "Why do you think it's so important to be quiet in church?" Little Timmy, he said, "Because people are praying." Little Johnny, he said, "Because that's what Mommy and Daddy said we're supposed to do." But this little girl, Anna, she spoke up and she said, "I think it's because people are sleeping." Friend, I'll be honest with you tonight. I know that some people can't help it. I know that some people were awake all through the night, maybe had a problem, maybe your child kept you awake all night. Maybe some people take medicine, they just can't help it. But I'll just be real frank with you. I can't picture myself closing my eyes in worship service and going to sleep. I can't do it. I'm not any better than anyone. I certainly don't believe that I'm better than anyone. In fact, many times I feel like I'm a lot worse than most people. But I will tell you this. I came to worship for a reason tonight. You came to worship for a reason tonight. I want to learn how to be a better servant of God every single breath I take. Tonight, if you're here and you don't feel like that you're a servant of God, I want you to know there's something wrong. There's something wrong in my heart when I say, I don't want to be the best that I can be for the Lord's service. There's something wrong there. That's the lesson from the parable of the talents. I hope tonight that you and I both will be challenged by God just to give it our best shot. Let's just try to be the 2-talent guy. If all we can be is the 2-talent guy, let's just try to do that. So that when we die, we can say like this man, I'm now ready to be offered and the time of my departure is at hand. I fought a good fight, I finished my course, and I kept the faith, and henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord shall give me at that day, and not to me only, but unto all them that love His appearing. Tonight, I've got to ask you, I've got to ask myself, do me and you love the Lord enough to say, I'm going to serve God when I leave this building tonight? Tomorrow, I'm still going to be serving God somewhere. I know you've got jobs. It's not like, I get paid to come here to the church building and go visit people and stuff like that. I realize that. There's a little bit difference in things that we've got going on, but I want to tell you this, the mission is still the same. Jesus said, go to all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. He that believeth not shall be damned. And I want to tell you tonight, they cannot hear if we don't tell them. I want to close with this idea. There were two men that Jesus saw fishing, and He taught them a valuable lesson. He said, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Something that always strikes me as strange but really good is that these men didn't give it a second thought. They didn't say, all right, I realize what you're saying, Lord, but let me tell you what, I've got this fishing business. I've got all this stuff going on. In fact, I'm really stressed out right now, and my family is relying on me to put food on the table. They didn't say that. You know what they did? They left it. They said, I know what you're telling me is the most important. Can I honestly say that I'm faithful to God when I haven't left my net? What if tonight you died and you reached the pearly gates and you saw Jesus face to face? Have you left your net? Friend, I've got to ask myself that. If you want to obey the gospel tonight, I want you to know there is a huge responsibility that you take on. You see, not only are you saying that I want to be saved by the grace of God, you're saying I've got a responsibility now to serve God for the rest of my life. Jesus said to count the cost. And I hope you'll do it right now. Will you do like these Christians in Acts chapter 2 when they repented and were baptized for the remission of their sins? The Bible says later in the chapter, they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and in breaking of bread and fellowship and prayers. You see, they had no problem committing. What does God want from me? These three lessons, I believe, tell us these three things. I can't live in sin. I've got to be faithful to God. I've got to do kingdom work. Tonight, will you come right now as we stand, as we sing?